Oh my God, I'm live. I'm live, and there was no video intro. I don't know if I made an error. I must have. Hello, everybody. I do apologize for jumping right on with no formal video opening to warm up the audience, as is often the case. We'll make sure to sort this out for next week. But welcome to this week's edition of Breaking Free of Psyops. I don't remember what episode we're on at this point. I think it's number 11, but it might be number 10. Either way, I do know what we discussed last week, which was a very controversial topic, and it was a difficult one to begin to even broach as a topic of conversation, which was, for those just tuning in for the first time today and not having listened to last week's episode, it is the ugly truth of Nikola Tesla. Evidence that Tesla, the original, not Tesla 2.0, the thing associated with Elon, but rather the original Tesla, from whence the name of the company had originated, seems to be itself a bit of a there's more to the story than we're told. Let's just say it that way. And just as I had been going through with the exercise of investigating the UFO psyop, which we've done in several past episodes, the idea that there is a multi-generational magic trick that is being run by self-professed Rosicrucian magicians, often of a theosophical, sometimes of a hermetic order of the Golden Dawn variety, that has been multi-generational in scope and scale to prepare the world for some form of an eschatological reset, with an idea of new gods, in this case, ET gods or demon ET gods, or AI, artificial intelligence demon ET gods, or time traveling humans from the deep future who have become something totally different as a new species, have broken the code of time travel and have gone back to the past and have been organizing and influencing all of scientific and technological innovation as we know it since the Renaissance, to more speedily bring about and usher in the material expression or the material technological baseline through which this suprahuman godlike entity that is ourselves in the future wishes to be brought online and needs us as instruments to operate almost without our consent or will, almost on a subconscious domain, to usher in some form of a more sped up cataclysmic purgation and thus renewal for a golden age, hence the Golden Dawn name. All that to say, there's a lot of creative writing that's been shaping and tempering the flow and pace of so much of human civilization's experience. The UFO phenomenon is one aspect of it. The creation of new secular gods is another, and the idea of obscuring the roots and the origins of human genius is another aspect of it. Because if people became too self-aware of what we are all capable of, if we are granted a proper, healthy, integral educational and cultural and moral experience, then these things that are made almost mystical, this quality of genius that is only for the lucky few, the touched, would actually be something we would recognize as being much more normalized, and maybe even the destiny of humanity as a whole, that yearns to express our highest creative reason as a normative function of day-to-day life, as a healthy, matured human society that is not here yet, is destined to become. And so the idea of Tesla and the stories affiliated with the imagery of Tesla has been something that I've been bumping into. I've written a series of books where my research was laid out that indicates, and I'm hoping to show and make as transparent my research and the causes of my misgivings over Tesla's great, genius as the modern electrical wizard. There's something other that I'm hoping to show. And last week, in the first part of this, what is becoming increasingly a little bit of a series, we went through some of the aspects of those misgivings, specifically Tesla's affiliation with a number of contact points with Aleister Crowley, with leading figures. Crowley himself was a member of British intelligence, pulling the U.S. in to World War I, who continued to exert influence even leading up to the occult rise of the Black magicians, both in Germany, but also in England and in the United States, that Tesla always seems to be very closely tied to. So we're going to continue this journey with part 2. There might be a part 3. I would like to wrap it up in one whole section, but it's a big story, and there's a lot of triangulating into the process. So we're going to use a method of triangulation. There will be no definitive absolute answers, but there will be reasonable causes for concern, as I think we've done with the previous classes on Peter Thiel, the rise of Palantir, its influence, its origins, as well as the earlier class on Elon Musk and the entire multi-generational operation that Musk's entire family has been involved with, which ties us again into something Hellfire Club. So without further ado, let's listen to a couple of words from today's sponsors before we jump into the thrust of the class. So first sponsor we've got today is Conscious Strength. There we go, Conscious Strength. So, Maha yourself with supplements that do not suck from Conscious Strength. Founded by Badlands' very own Jordan Sather in 2019, Conscious Strength products are made in America and won't break your bank, unlike other online brands. The lineup includes collagen for strengthening joints and hair, electrolytes to get rid of those cramps, green powder that tastes good and mixes easy, Shilajit gummies, methylene blue, zeolite, and many more. Flip the finger to pharma, be your own doctor, and get supplements that you can trust from Conscious Strength. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/strength to shop now and use promo code Badlands for 10% off. One more time, that's badlandsmedia.tv/strength. The link will be in the description below. All right. And now, and by the way, I really enjoy the green powders that that Conscious Strength puts out. They're fantastic. They do taste that good. They do mix easy. Highly endorse those. I haven't tried the other products yet, but I'm sure they're all just as good. Now for one more word by Mike Lindell. So Mike, what do you have to say? I'm guessing it might have something to do with pillows. Let's find out.
It's finally here, our second annual mega sale. This sale only comes around once a year, so take advantage of the best offers ever while you can. For example, save 50% on our Giza Dream bed sheets, as low as $29.98. And for the first time ever on TV, My Pillow mattresses and My Pillow mattress toppers, as low as $99.98. And you save 50% on our Lux Pure 6-piece towel sets. Regular $69.98, now only $39.98. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, regular $49.98, on sale for $17.98. Wait on it, mega sale, only $14.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our second annual mega sale. But wait, there's more. To make the mega sale even more special, when you order right now, your order's going to ship absolutely free.
I was right. It was pillows. Haha. Okay. So, Tesla is not the only one with telepathic powers. All right. So without further ado, let's jump into this. So the spooky image here, AI product, is a cropped image of Tesla at a Ouija board. You don't see the Ouija board with ghosts ephemerally floating around in the background. It's a bit of an over the top image, but I think it'll be we'll hopefully discover rather fitting for some of the content that we're about to go into. A lot of this, for those who want to really internalize and investigate deeply the findings with greater rigor, footnoted, and everything of the sort, I suggest my Revenge of the Mystery Cults trilogy. The content of the Tesla work really took place and is featured in Rosicrucian Golem Volume 2, featured there in the middle, so you know what to look for if you go to Amazon. If you contact me through the website, canadianpatriot.org, there's a little contact section, and I can send you a signed copy if you'd like, but a lot of the content is there. These are thick books. They all work together, and they all kind of approach the question of what is the influence of the ancient mystery cults of Babylon that ran so much of the ancient world and that went underground, often masquerading in Christian skin suits, but always maintaining a occult inner religion, an esoteric structure, overseeing the worst disasters, assassinations, wars, for very, very dark reasons over the next 2 millennia. And how do these express themselves in the material domain, which is where Mystery Babylon and the Age of Aquarius comes in, is looking at the sort of geopolitical expression of these things from the Templar Order as one occult initiatory degree system masquerading as Christian, but is actually was always something else. The Cathars, the Hospitallers, the Jesuits, the Dominicans, and the variety of different orders, sometimes but not always affiliated with the Catholic Church, that have been used to infiltrate Western civilization and undermine it from within, leading up to the Age of Aquarius, the New Age. The middle one deals not with the material, but rather with the intellectual battles, principally, and thus the fight over science, the fight over education of the mystery cults. And we use as the case study both Isaac Newton as a synthetic cardboard cutout, a construct who's been sold to us as this great genius who had fruit fall on his head, but in fact, the evidence points to the fact that he discovered absolutely nothing. Zero, zilch. And when one looks to the actual causes of those useful formulae that were attributed to Newton as the great discoverer, one can find, and this has been proven pretty conclusively, that other people, sometimes those living much, much earlier than Newton, even before Newton was born, like Johannes Kepler, were the real discoverers of those eurekas that were plagiarized, repackaged, and associated with the figure of Newton, who had many handlers in the alchemical Rosicrucian Kabbalist operation known as the Royal Society of London, set up right out of the ashes of the Civil War of England. And that story is told also in the Rosicrucian Golem volume. Darwin, Elon Musk, there's special chapters on them as well as synthetic cardboard cutouts. And then finally, volume 3 is Edgar Poe's Unsolved Mystery and other tales of ratiocination, which features Aleister Crowley between Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Edgar Poe, and a picture of a place known as Sybil's Cave in New Jersey, which was a center of occultism and a domain that took up one of Edgar Poe's most underrated, important tales of ratiocination, The Murder of Mary Rogers, which served as the entry point to investigate what was Poe actually doing, what was he battling, who controlled and assassinated him both in life but also in character after he died, to paint him as this morbid, obsessive, womanizing, opium smoke, addict, fiend of the morbid and the death. So what's going on there? And I think I do a pretty decent job of addressing and answering a lot of those questions. So anyway, those books are available. Again, the volume 2 will be the content of what I addressed today. What do we establish in part 1? Part 1, that Tesla himself, even though he's promoted as this great sublime soul, he was in fact a proponent of eugenics, sterilization of the unfit, as the basis for a global technocracy. We cited some of Tesla's own words, his own quotes from his own writings and interviews to make that point that we're not just slandering him, he said it. Tesla's best friend for over 20 years was Aleister Crowley's disciple, George Sylvester Vril, who ran German occult propaganda operations inside of the United States in World War I and then again in World War II, and was the primary spokesman for the Nazis in America, for which he went to jail for about 10 years and then came out totally rehabilitated. He was also one of the fathers of modern conspiracy analysis. So a lot of the exposures of the Jew banker conspiracy, the Protocols of Zion, the bankers that took over America and were funding the Bolsheviks and Hitler, a lot of this was popularized by George Sylvester Vril. That's an odd thing, right? Why would somebody who is himself so directly a part of the thing that made these wars possible, that orchestrated these wars artificially, why would this black magician be also so committed to the truth of exposing the bankers behind these wars? That's a good question. Well, that's answered And it has a lot to do with the question of the old tried and true technique of limited hangout, is you give away a lot of information that you know people are going to stumble on their own. And so you want to try to co-opt that information, co-opt how they understand those higher conspiracies, and then redirect attention away from the black magicians that are running the show, that are tied in direct continuity to the ancient Babylonian spycraft, and direct it towards an acceptable enemy that's disposable, like the Jews or whatever. So George Sylvester Vril, best friend of Nikola Tesla, the only person in the world that Tesla wrote lovingly great letters and poetry to, which we cited some of Tesla's poetry to George Sylvester Vril as well. We pointed out through, again, Tesla's own writings that Tesla attacked the notion of the soul. He described that only the fool believes in the existence of such a thing as a soul, God, or even broader metaphysics that are grounded in some idea of morality. He said instead, and tried to make the case in so many of his interviews, that I feel like people don't even read his own writings because it troubles the religion of what's been built up around Tesla that offends our emotions. But if you read the writings, he says this again and again across decades of interviews that are public, that he says, no, human beings are just machines. We're the sum total of our senses, of our impulses, and there is no soul. And he also made the points on many an occasion that we cited from several of those quotes that he had evolved self-conscious machines that would eventually become almost human. That this was a new form of life that he had evolved using, again, a 2-year magic trick that he had set up all across the United States using his tele-automata, this floating machine with blinky lights that would solve problems that he would ask the audience mathematically to throw at the device, and for which there was a person, a collaborator with a remote control device, signaling which lights would go off to answer the mathematical questions. But it's a magic trick for a reason, so people don't know that the guy's behind the curtain, and Tesla is happily convincing everybody that this is a form of entity, a thinking entity embedded within and expressing itself through the machine. Not a new concept as it stands, because a lot of these same fallacies are being replicated yet again here today as we live in the form of the AI, the artificial intelligence cult. But the point that we ended at is the very last slide, and this is it. The last slide was Tesla describing this tele-automata in 1907, where he describes the future of self-thinking machines as more evolved forms of his machine, saying, quote, and this is from his own writings, where Tesla says, a machine is being perfected, which, without operator in control, left to itself, will behave as if endowed with intelligence of its own. It will be responsive to the faintest external influences, and from these unaided determine its subsequent actions as if possessed of selective qualities, logic, and reason. It will perform the duties of an intelligent slave. Many of us will live to see Bulwer's dream realized. What the hell is he talking about? Okay, what is Bulwer's dream realized? This is going to be the brunt of today's presentation, is really examining this little glitch in the machine. What is this anomalous obsession with creating a new species that'll be a self-thinking machine? What is Bulwer's dream? What is this that Tesla clearly knows, clearly feels very passionately about? So Tesla was very influenced by the writings of a figure named Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton, who lived from 1803 until 1873. Several chapters in all 3 of the books that I authored feature him in different ways. The particular book that's of interest for this moment to answer the question of where does this Bulwer's dream come from with the thinking machines is featured there on the screen next to Bulwer himself, named The Coming Race. It is actually Vril, or The Coming Race, the full title of the book, published in, I believe it was 1841 or 42. The concepts within this book, it's a fiction tale, but it's one which highly influenced the Nazis, the Nazi SS, the Thule Society. The Vril Society is a subsection of the Nazi Thule Society, which took on the name of Vril, for this mysterious etheric fluid that the adept initiates and high priests and oracles, the prophetesses, would have the power to tune into, to be able to speak to the powers of the beyond, of the demons, of the ascended masters, and other, as well as wield telepathic power of mind reading, astral projection, and everything else was made possible entirely through this etheric imagined fluid that Bulwer-Lytton had dubbed the Vril. There was already a concept that goes back to ancient times, but this is going to keep on coming back again and again and again throughout this series. So again, within Bulwer-Lytton's writings, we have concepts of ascended masters channeled by elites. We've got the idea of a secret order of immortal adepts or spiritual vampires that are featured in his various writings, including Zanoni, which we'll talk about a little bit later. In this particular book, we have the idea of the hollow earth, which he popularized probably more than anyone else, that there are these Atlantean super beings, these super races inside of our hollow earth awaiting the takeover of the lesser evolved humans on the surface dwellers who lack the higher powers of these Aryan super beings, these Teutonic Aryan Atlantean dwellers. That there is telepathic communication with humanoid robots that are undifferentiable from actual humans, that the creatures, the coming race, the future more evolved beings inside of the earth interface with. They almost have the power of Jesus, these guys, to heal with the touch. So these are these imagined characters that are stumbled upon in this fictional tale by two American explorers who do some kerplunking and find themselves lost in these tunnel systems that take them into this underground civilization, and the journeys and adventures that befall them is featured throughout this tale. But again, it was so influential at inspiring Madame Blavatsky. Her mother was the official translator of Bulwer-Lytton's writings into Russian before the young mystic became the founder of the Theosophical Society. Aleister Crowley featured several of Bulwer-Lytton's writings in his mandatory reading material for the adepts of his own societies, and much more. And then I brought up the Nazis. Bulwer, in his The Coming Race, describes the superior race, saying, quote, "In all service, whether in or out of doors, they make great use of automaton figures, which are so pliant to the operators of Vril, that they actually seem gifted with reason. It was scarcely possible to distinguish the figures I beheld, apparently guiding or superintending the rapid movements of vast engines from human forms endowed with thought." It's one of the figures who's meeting and interfacing with this society. So his influence again on modern occultism, he was the founder of the Rosicrucian Order of Anglia, which is the first of many modern Rosicrucian orders. The Rosicrucians themselves had officially come onto the scene back in 1616 with the first official Fama Rosicrucianus, followed by the Confessios of Christian Rosenkreutz, a fictitious composite character that had died apparently over a century earlier, and whose fictitious grave is the source of many a grail quest of initiates who are seeking to find the magical philosopher's stones that Rosenkreutz, the Rosy Cross man himself, had discovered to provide the key for immortality, of which is the escape from death, which is the thing that all of these occultists seem to always be afraid of. It's just basically death. So Bulwer-Lytton revived this thing with his Rosicrucian Order of East Anglia. Many of the founding members of that in 1867 went on to become the also founding members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was founded officially in 1886. Samuel MacGregor Mathers, just to name one of many. The Theosophists also, several leading Theosophists were also members of the Rosicrucian Order of Anglia and initiates, disciples of Bulwer-Lytton, as was Madame Blavatsky, who directly knew and was overseen by Lytton early on in her development. I mentioned already the Nazi Thule Society and Himmler's Ahnenerbe were influenced deeply by the Vril and the writings of Bulwer-Lytton. Richard Wagner wrote his opera Rienzi based upon the book Rienzi by Bulwer-Lytton, the book which Hitler said so deeply influenced him to become the man of greatness that Wagner and Bulwer-Lytton portrayed in the character of Rienzi, a figure during the Roman Republic. H.G. Wells was deeply influenced by Bulwer-Lytton's writings and even wrote his War of the Worlds, based upon the idea not of the coming race being incubated within the Earth, waiting to take over the inferior, lesser evolved surface humans, but rather from Mars, in the case of H.G. Wells. But it's effectively a similar motif. Thomas Huxley was a friend, a colleague of Bulwer-Lytton, shared spaces in several secret societies, including the Orphic Circle, as well as the Ghost Club, devoted to basically trying to popularize spiritualism, the search of necromancy, and giving these things, necromancy, levitation, magical powers, communications with the spirit domain, a scientific veneer. The Orphic Circle, again, was a very big and still very influential department of control of international occultism. One of the members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which grew out of the Rosicrucian Order of Bulwer-Lytton, was Aleister Crowley. They're featured as his moniker Baphomet that he called himself when he oversaw the creation of the Ordo Templi Orientis, that he became the Grand Master of and the manager of, at least of the English-speaking world, and later on in the 1920s, after the death of Theodore Royce, of the entire world. He aspired to become the ascended, or the world teacher, in opposition to figures like Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater's preferred choice of Jiddu Krishnamurti, who they said was the new world teacher, the Maitreya. Crowley took offense. He said, no, the Ascended Masters are talking to me, and Master Mori and others have told me that I am the Ascended Master, or I am the world teacher. And he basically had a splinter group that went on to act accordingly, called the Pan Sophia Lodge in Germany. Many of them became very influential occultists around the inner sanctum of the SS. Even though the outward form was persecuted, the inner sanctum was always influenced by this thing. And that became the Saturnian Lodge. So featured on the right there is a picture of Baphomet pointing up and down with the famous Solviet Coagula, the androgynous Baphomet, goat-headed, pan-like deity with wings. That was popularized in that image by Eliphas Levi, featuring two obelisks flanking him on either side. This is a Hermetic imagery in the modern day. That's Eliphas Levi's drawing of it, done in, I think, the 1870s or maybe the 1860s. Now, Bulwer-Lytton was also somebody who was training the French occultist himself, the Grand Master Eliphas Levi. And the biographer of Lytton had written that it was Bulwer-Lytton who encouraged Levi to write a treatise on magic. As a result, he later wrote Dogma et Rituel de la Haute Magie in 1855. This was later translated into English by Arthur Edward Waite of the Golden Dawn as Transcendental Magic, Its Doctrine, and Its Ritual, an immensely influential piece of trash. I've read this book. It is really, really childish, but people take this stuff seriously. It's basically giving you different techniques of carrying out varieties of rituals, to do scrying, to set up your herbs in just such a way that the spirits are going to respond. Anyway, it's a lot of imagination, but it's an organizing principle. If you believe it, then it has all of the effect of reality. If people if a bunch of people believe in a myth and act accordingly, then it is as if that myth carries some physical weight. So Bulwer-Lytton, so he had a direct role to play in the rise of the Baphomet cult around the Templar religion, or the New Templar religion that was, I think, already behind the creation of Rosicrucianism anyway, after the Templars went underground as medieval witches. When they were persecuted, they appeared in several forms, of which the Rosicrucians were one, but then they took on a new virulent form under the Levi-Lytton combo. That is a picture of his very humble childhood home, born into I don't know how you maintain a castle like that. Like how do you sweep the floors? Like I guess there's like an army. It's like Downton Abbey, I suppose. There's like an army of servants that just like live to keep the lawns mowed and the heating on. But geez, what a house. So anyway, this is his family estate. He took pride in the fact that both the Bulwer and the Lytton family lineage both originated in the Viking conquest of England, known as the Northman invasion, the Norman invasion of 1056, and both were sides of the family, father and mother, were rooted in a long oligarchist tradition that were rooted in the being allies with William the Conqueror, who granted the Doomsday Book upon his conquest and created the new elite, the new oligarchy, with the bringing in of feudalism. Glorious feudalism is the new institution of governance into England, which formed the baseline of what later on became the Crusades, basically. So there's that. What else is going on with Kenilworth Castle? Just a couple of points of interesting trivia. Just trivia, okay? Fun trivia. Is that people might have seen this movie or read the books, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Seems all innocent and cute. I saw them, very, very enjoyable movies. I read a few of the books some years back. Enjoyable candy. But what's actually being infused under the surface, and what the hell is that building behind the kid on the floating broomstick? That's actually filmed in at Kenilworth Castle. The entire idea of the Invisible College, by the way, which is the invisible school that these magical gifted children go to, who are all part of this superior bloodline of magicians, not mudbloods, right? Not mudblood normies, but rather these are the superior beings, perhaps even echoes of some coming race idea of magical children being taught magic at the Invisible College. This is very Rosicrucian. So probably want to think twice maybe about encouraging your grandkids and children to wear Harry Potter and Hermione costumes for Halloween, or celebrating how well, you can't stop a kid from celebrating Halloween, but still, it should cause us to pause and wonder what the hell is really going on with some of these stories. Batman Returns. This is actually a misspelt Wayne Manor. So the film 1990 or 91. By Tim Burton, who does seem to honestly be a Satanist. I think Tim Burton's probably a Satanist, as is Johnny Depp, who they've collaborated together for some time. But in that film, Batman, that features sort of the schizoid dual identity of a vigilante by night with one identity, animated by revenge and seething anger to destroy evil, because this kid was traumatized brutally by watching his parents killed in front of his face, created this split-like personality of a creature by night and a wealthy, charming figure, playboy by day, Bruce Wayne. And the type of very stark schism of this dualistic break of the identity featured within the comic book and then this movie is quite something. And anyway, that movie was also filmed. Wayne Manor is Kenilworth, the Bulwer-Lytton Kenilworth Castle. Interesting point. There's a few other pop culture references that I'm skipping now, but just to move it along. I mentioned that the actual title is Vril, the Coming Race, and it is the origin of the modern idea of the luminiferous ether, etheric fluid that animated so much of the battles in 19th and 20th century science. Now, I'm not saying that there is not some ether. I'm not saying that. Even Einstein himself agreed that there must be some form of ether through which light and other things can move from star systems to star systems, that there's no empty space. There is something. But what is that thing? How do we define it? Is the big battle. And the mystics, the magicians, work very hard to try to make the term itself become something where we think of ghosts live, the disembodied spirits of the dead live, of demons live, of angelic beings live, and influence things that only the sensitive souls are capable of responding to. Basically, the priestesses of the oracles, the telepaths, the ascended master communicators. So anyway, that's part of the idea of the Bulwer-Lytton Vril. It also emerges in various ways. I already mentioned the Vril Society. That's a book by Robert Sefer, who's a practicing occultist and popularizer of. He provides a very popular YouTube channel, which is useful to watch sometimes, but to be aware that he's really a Luciferian occultist who's popularizing and giving a very sanitized image of a lot of these topics for a mass audience to slowly be inducted into this brainwashing. On the left is a figure known as Wilhelm Reich, somebody who's closely tied to the same Crowleyite occult networks and who developed his own theories of orgone energy as being the sexual fluid, the sexual power of Kundalini that was the creative energy source that animated the entire universe and that we could all tap into through various devices that he had developed. The idea of eros and erotic energy as the source of all creation is something that was very important for the ancient occult high priest that organized the Isis Earth Mother Goddess worship, worshiping the Gaia cults of ancient times, the what are known as Magna Mater, the Great Mother cults, but also the Isis, the Cybele Otis cults, the divine feminine of the erotic variety, the Gnostic Mary Magdalene sects that had the Orphic, the idea of infusing the Orphic initiation rites into Christian skin suits. A lot of this all circled around an idea of God not as a being of agapic love, but rather as of erotic love, which is not really devoid of higher filial and agapic sentiment. I think that eros becomes something that is actually quite destructive, but they invert it. It's all about an inversion. So these sciences of Reich and others were all based, including Bulwer-Lytton, on sex magic, right? Overcoming taboos, right? Looking for taboos, the things that your conscience creates boundaries on, says that you shouldn't do, that you feel is wrong. You should that's what you should do. If killing somebody feels wrong, that's what you should do to overcome the taboo. If having sex with that child feels wrong, well, that means you should only do it that much more. And listen to Aleister Crowley's documenting and giving advice on how do you pick the proper male sacrifice or the proper human sacrifice that he describes as being the child of the age, I think, 9 to 10. And he describes the different attributes of the perfect kind of human sacrifice child. And then he'll say, oh, but I'm just joking. But in fact, he's not. I really don't think he's joking, because it's one of those big taboos, and you become stronger in their mind by leaning into the taboo, overcoming, breaking through the barriers of the belief in right and wrong, and coming out of the fire a stronger, more godlike person. Bulwer-Lytton, as I mentioned, was also a member of the Athenian Club with Thomas Huxley. So Thomas Huxley, somebody who's celebrated as this like anti-mystical, scientific, logical figure. He's Darwin's handler and ex-club founder, another guy who's actually very influential on Nikola Tesla. In fact, almost all of Tesla's writings on science refer to members of Thomas Huxley's ex-club as authority, including Herbert Spencer, Lyell, many others. Huxley himself is directly cited by Nikola Tesla as a source, and I get through that in I think chapter 10 of my Rosicrucian Golem book. Michael Faraday, Rudyard Kipling, Charles Darwin, I mentioned, John Russell, Herbert Spencer is inspired by Lytton, John Ruskin, James Clerk Maxwell, and John Stuart Mill are all also members of the Athenian Club. Basically a study, it's the Athenian Club is, or the Athenaeum Club, is a study of ancient Greco-Roman mysteries, philosophy, but from the worst, with the worst filter possible. Not looking for the good stuff, looking only for the useful, magical stuff. Useful if you're an imperialist. The Golden Dawn would feature such notable occultists as W.B. Yeats, the writer, A.E. Waite, Bram Stoker, the inventor of Dracula lore, vampire lore, basically beings that have to just suck blood to stay alive forever. MacGregor Mathers, the guy who recruited Crowley. Sir William Crookes, who becomes a lifelong friend and a mentor of Tesla starting in 1892 onward all the way till William Crookes' death. And of course, George Sylvester Verake's close colleague, Aleister Crowley. And just to really get across, a lot of people I know like Blavatsky because they read some of her stuff and some of the theosophical literature, and it all seems kind of pretty and nice. And, it seems like a nice breath of fresh air if you've been born into very heavy-handed, shame-based forms of Christianity or Islam or Judaism. And it seems like a breath of fresh air, this type of perennial philosophy. It's very free, very creative oriented. So people like it, but there's something, I'm just telling you, there's something else in the esoteric belief structure that's that's embedded at the core, at the heart and soul of it. And he comes out in certain places that people often overlook, like in her Secret Doctrine, a 3-volume massive study, mostly plagiarized material from other occultists, mind you, that she never credits at all. But 1888, and she writes of her view of Satan, which she describes that Satan will now be shown in the teachings of the secret doctrine, allegorized as good, and sacrifice, a god of wisdom under different names. Satan, the serpent of Genesis, is the real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind. For it is he who was the harbinger of light, bright and radiant Lucifer, who opened the eyes of the woman created by Jehovah, and he who was the first to whisper in her ear, "You eat there, of you shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil." He can only be regarded in light of a savior. Lucifer is divine and terrestrial light, the Holy Ghost and Satan at one and the same time, and it now stands proven that Satan is in us. He is our mind, our tempter, our redemptor, our redeemer, our intelligent liberator, and savior from pure animalism. Well, that's a new spin on Satan that I hadn't encountered before, so there you go. Blavatsky is a Satanist. For those who, again, were on the fence, she's a Satanist. I'm sorry. She's also a racist. She's got whole sections in her Secret Doctrine where she expounds upon her belief that though we're all beings of light, and Lucifer in our inner core, having been descended by the fourth root race of Atlanteans. Despite that, some of the darker races, the blacks, the Mongols, the Chinese, the yellows, they're actually, the Jews even, she puts in that category too, they're actually more contaminated with proto-monkey progeny or fathers, ancestors that had more procreation with the race of the fallen of the Elohim, and thus those particular races are inferior. They've lost more of their special magical powers of telepathy and communications, sensitivity with the magic forces of necromancy. They've lost those forces, they've lost the powers, and as such, they're ultimately not welcome in the next phase of human evolution, which he calls forth in the fifth root race that's being seeded right now by the highest, the most special of their clairvoyant powers, which is the Teutonic Aryan breed that she believes is of the highest caliber, that is going to be endowed with the power to instill the new root race, the new transhuman that she proclaims must occur in California, which sets the stage for what becomes Silicon Valley in a few decades after her death, by followers of Theosophy, by the way. So Lucifer magazine, for again, those who might still be confused, she immediately in 1888 sets up a magazine to promote Theosophy called Lucifer magazine. There's issue number 1 right there, co-authored with Mabel Collins, who was supposed to be her replacement. She was grooming her, but then Mabel Collins went in a different direction. That's actually a whole section in volume 3 of Revenge of the Mystery Cults, because that ties into Jack the Ripper. Lucifer, another disciple of Blavatsky, who became a leading figure of one of the major branches of Theosophy in the 1920s and 30s, was Alice Bailey. There's a picture there of Lucis Trust, still to this very day an officially sanctioned NGO at the United Nations. They fund the meditation chamber of the United Nations. It's a very creepy postmodernist chamber. The ritual prayers that were begun in 1947 for the World Invocation Days were also overseen by Alice Bailey. And keep in mind, I think most people watching this show probably know the name Lucis Trust had a previous name in 1922 when it changed to Lucis Trust. But before it took on that name change, it was called Lucifer Trust. So, and they published a lot of the materials, the official materials for the UN. I mentioned there Bram Stoker, just to reemphasize that both Bram Stoker and Tesla's best friend, George Sylvester Vril, together disciples of this Bulwer-Lytton network, were both also promoters of vampirism. the idea of the immortal special beings that transcend death, but only through the sucking of the life energy of victims that have to always welcome them in. That's George Sylvester Vril got very, very popular in 1907 for writing the book My First 2,000 Years, his own sort of vampire tale. There's The House of the Vampire, featuring energy vampires of a homoerotic variety that suck the energy of the young artists in order to keep their vital fluids going. And of course, Bram Stoker has two editions of his Count Dracula, based upon the very real Vlad the Impaler, Vlad III, who was the son of Vlad II of the very real Order of the Dragon. That's a very real order in Eastern Europe of certain royal houses that we might have a whole class on that. Cynthia Chung, my wife, actually wrote quite a bit on the Order of the Dragon and their influence in even fueling certain elements of the Protestant Reformation movement, which is a whole wild story unto itself. All right, so just to put a little bit of meat on the bones there, I mentioned quickly Zanoni, A Rosicrucian Tale by Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton. That's another one of these very important, almost gospels, Bibles of the Black Brotherhood. Zanoni again features, it was 1845 or so that he wrote this. It features the story of an adept that's centuries and centuries old, maybe millennia old, who's looking for a new recruit, a new initiate. And Mejnour is the name of this old Rosicrucian. And he's giving tests to his target, his young man. But it's a battle over whether the young man can actually pass the tests or not. And there's some very revealing dialogues. So within Zanoni, here's an edition which is... I don't know the language, actually. So if somebody watching in the live chat can tell me what language this is, but this features the Theosophical emblem, so it's very close to the Theosophists. Who really worked hard to promote this as one of their sacred texts, featuring the Star of David, which of course is a much more sexualized symbol from Chaldean Babylonian pre-Yahweh. I mean, the Jews in captivity in Babylon weren't really calling themselves Jews at that time. As I've come to discover more and more, at that time, during that 40-year period, they were Yahweh worshippers. It meant something a little bit different. There's no real references to a lot of the terms that are used or found in the Old Testament today. That seems to have come later on as writings. But there was the infusion of the Babylonian witchcraft into some elements of the cultural matrix of the Yahweh worshippers in captivity that were basically transmitting already existent Babylonian witchcraft. I think Kabbalah seems to come out of that. Anyway, the idea of that symbol, which features nowhere in Judaism. Rabbis, I've listened to some lectures by leading rabbis who speak very, very cogently about the fact that the Star of David itself as an emblem is non-existent in the Bible. There's nowhere within the officially sanctioned texts of Judaism that features this symbol. So where does it actually come from? And this is where you got to kind of... Robert Zephyr that I mentioned is actually kind of useful at bringing some data points to the surface pertaining to the male-female convergent energies of the upper and the two different triangles you have here within the theosophical design of the snake eating its own tail of the Ouroboros, which has several different layers of meaning. Some might seem kind of good. Other ones are sick as sin. Let me just tell you that. And of course, the inverted left hand spinning swastika combined. So it's always fun to see the swastika imagery next to the Star of David. That happens more than you would realize. And that was why the Theosophical Society republished Zanoni many, many times. And in it, there's an interesting scholar named Jules Evans who wrote a series called the Spiritual Eugenics Series. And in it, he makes a point that I just quoted here because I found it insightful, where he says that Zanoni was a huge influence on the occult revival of the 19th century. Its biggest influence was through Madame Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society. Her mother translated Lytton's novels into Russian, and the young Blavatsky devoured them and absorbed their ideas into her new religious movement. She turned fiction into religious myth, claiming to be in contact with the secret superhuman order called the Masters, who sought to guide the human evolution and create a new super race. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was also at least partially inspired by Lytton's Zanoni, and Aleister Crowley put the book on his recommended reading list for magical adepts. The idea of a secret order of super beings influenced later fantasy fiction, from Algernon Blackwood to Dion Fortune. I cut that off, unfortunately, but it goes on. So this is now my writing, saying just point. In Bulwer-Lytton's book Zanoni, the Rosicrucian Grand Master, Mejnour, so Mejnour describes, this is a quote now from Zanoni, where Mejnour, the Rosicrucian, says, quote, or describes his, quote, hope to form a mighty and numerous race with force and power sufficient to permit them to acknowledge to mankind their majestic conquests and dominion, to become the true lords of this planet, invaders, perchance, of others, masters of the inimical and malignant tribes by which at this moment we are surrounded, a race that may proceed in their deathless destinies from stage to stage of celestial glory and rank at last among the nearest ministrants and agents gathered around the throne of thrones. Like, they speak very, very melodramatically, to say the least. Bulwer-Lytton is speaking through the voice of Mejnour clearly, and is making the point that this coming race that they have to persuade everybody must inevitably replace the outdated, malignant tribes. He's speaking about nation states, the nation states and the cultures of the world that are not accepting the restoration of the grand feudalism, where everybody back in the crusading days knew their place as serfs of the higher lordships, to be used and provided for or discarded at the whimsy of the higher class, the higher caste. And those days are not coming back very easily for Bulwer-Lytton and his ilk. And so, it's kind of condescending, if you ask me. But he makes a point also in a letter that he writes to one of his publishers in 1871, nearing the end of his life. He wrote of the importance of specifically Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection as integral to the coming race thesis, saying, quote, as a letter to the editor, "The only important point is to keep in view the Darwinian proposition that a coming race is destined to supplant our races, that such a race would be very gradually formed, and be indeed a new species developing itself out of our old one." Very important concepts, especially for those who might have watched my Hidden Hand Behind UFOs documentary, episode 2, on H.G. Wells's coming New Age. H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds and the Rise of a New Age. That documentary really gets across the importance that Wells had placed, as well as Thomas Huxley, on the notion of convincing the world that Darwinian evolution is as sacred gospel that must render conventional religious ideas of God, of the nature of mankind, irrelevant and unscientific, obsolete, in order to then get across an idea that not only is imperialism justified, as it is based upon the Darwinian idea of the survival of the fittest against the unfittest. So thus, you can't argue against the scientific validity of empire per self, of which Darwin was a devoted, loyal servant. But then you also can't really argue against the idea that maybe more advanced beings, more evolved beings, must necessarily replace the outdated, inferior beings. And Bulwer-Lytton had a son, and that's his very, very humble son, Robert Lytton, who rose to great prominence within the British Empire and became Viceroy. What do you call it? I forget the name. Governor General of India from 1876 until 1882 or so. And Robert Lytton was a great example of somebody who really took on his dad's lessons and applied it very enthusiastically to the governing of a big chunk of the world's population in India after Britain had gotten control of their crown jewel. I think at the time there was about 400 or 500 million lives in India, but that was quickly falling due to British-controlled famines, which Lytton happily oversaw, and they said they're 1876 to 1880. So from my volume 2, I just quoted a little point that I made here. Bulwer-Lytton passed his teachings on to his son Robert, 1st Earl of Lytton, who was appointed Viceroy and Governor General of India from 1876 to 1880. In this powerful position, Robert put his father's social Darwinian theories to practice by orchestrating the Great Famine, overseeing the systematic murder of over 10 million Indians from 1876 to 1878 alone. During the peak of the Madras famine of 1876, Robert Lytton scandalously organized a vast week-long feast for over 68,000 dignitaries in celebration for Queen Victoria's investiture as Empress of India. So what a sick slap in the face. While people are starving, while you're withholding food from India, you're ensuring that the grains that are produced and the other foodstuffs that are produced in India are being exported so that the farmers, the people who live in India, are not even able to eat the food that they produce because free trade. They did the same thing to the Irish just a little bit before that, killing over 2 million, or killing 1 million and causing 2 million to leave Ireland. Might be even more than that. And they did it again to India, but on an even bigger scale. And there's just some pictures of famines caused by the British, which continued on all the way up through Winston Churchill, who oversaw his own famines that provably killed over 3 million Indians during World War II that did not have to die were it not for the willful genocidal policies of Winston Churchill. Again, these are all not mistakes of empire. These are conscious decisions. Now, the thing about Bulwer-Lytton was that the time he's running as Governor General of India, 1876 to 1880, that's the period that the Theosophical Society is moving their headquarters to Adyar, India, where Blavatsky, Colonel Olcott, the guy who, just so those who may not know, Colonel Olcott, who co-founded the Theosophical Society out of New York with Blavatsky, as both of them were fans of the Fox sisters, these mediums, these sisters who were raising money, touring America, doing ghost rappings, table levitations, things like that, tricks, basically magic tricks. They were both like touring and watching the Fox sisters when they met each other, setting up the Theosophical Society first in New York, but then quickly set up shop in India the moment Robert Lytton takes power, and that becomes the headquarters. And both of them gain access to all of the princes, all of the power players of India. They've got direct red carpet treatment to the power players of India. And I would say that could not have been possible had it not been for the British Empire's directing hand, and that would have been directly Robert Lytton. There's another picture of him in full regalia. This guy takes himself super seriously. You can see this. The philosophy of elitism really shows in how you comport yourself sometimes, and the fact that he just really ate up the grandeur and prestige of the. I mean, like, just look at him. I can't say anything more than that. It speaks for itself. A 2001 London Guardian article, which was pretty useful, described Lytton's murderous hand in the Great Famine, writing, quote, this is from the London Guardian. Lytton believed in free trade. He did nothing to check the huge hikes in grain prices. Economic modernization led household and village reserves to be transferred to central depots using recently built railroads. Much was exported to England, where there had been poor harvests. Telegraph technology allowed prices to be centrally coordinated and, inevitably, raised in thousands of small towns. Relief funds were scanty because Lytton was eager to finance military campaigns in Afghanistan. Conditions in emergency camps were so terrible that some peasants preferred to go to jail. A few, starved and senseless, resorted to cannibalism. This was all of little consequence to many English administrators who, as believers in Malthusianism, thought that famine was nature's response to Indian overbreeding. That's a very truthful, cogent analysis of the cold Malthusian logic managing the darker-skinned inferior races on behalf of the white man's burden, as some had called it. When Blavatsky dies, the dominant leader of the majority of the most important theosophical lodges for some decades becomes this woman right here. Her name is Annie Besant. She takes over largely in 1889. There are splinter groups. You know, William Quan Judge has the Aryan Theosophists in America. There's a number of splinter groups setting up. But she runs the Mabel Collins tries to set up her own thing. Anyway, she ends up becoming the president of the Congress Party of India during World War I. That's an interesting thing, that this woman, who's first a radical materialist socialist Fabian Society leader, then goes and becomes a spiritualist anti-materialist leader of Theosophy, and she maintains membership to both organizations the entire time. She goes on to lead the Freedom Party in India. So it's like, how does that happen? And she says here of her philosophy, that we are living in an environment that is destructive of the higher evolution. And at our peril, we leave it as it is when the coming race must inevitably be born. So even she, who's acting like a champion of the poor and of the oppressed and the exploited, she even ingratiates herself to become the president. I can't emphasize this enough. The president of the India Congress Party, the resistance party of the British Empire. She becomes the head of it. She's speaking like this about the inevitability of to prepare the ground for the coming race. I'm sorry, for most Indians, they got to know, or maybe they should have known, they didn't know, that they're not included. Maybe the Brahmin higher crust, who have been led to believe that they're descended from some Aryan super race and are thus, granted access to the higher caste of masters in India that are then going to work for the British Empire. Maybe they might think that they're allowed to be part of the new coming race, but the vast, vast majority, like the 98%, are not welcome to that club. And she goes on further in 1911. She spoke of her desires for a new world religion to unite the world in peace. Isn't that nice? But a peace under the British Empire. The same British Empire she acts like she's critical of as she's representing the freedom movements of India. But she's openly writing that Britain is working in India. How India is reacting on Britain until you see until you see gradually forming amid the dust and the turmoil of the present the outlines of a mighty world empire with East and West together, mighty world powers linking and marching side by side until India shall no longer be a constant menace, a danger in the moment of Britain's weakness, but shall be a buttress and a strength, the oldest and the youngest branches of the Aryan family joining hands in one mighty empire, which by the peace it will make will offer a fit field for the spread, for the teaching of a world religion. So she's talking about a very different kind of India, but one that has to be, I think, really broken down and destroyed, purged of its rebelliousness, of its desires to hold on to any idea of its tradition that were not contaminated by the rewriting of Indian philosophy by the British imperialists that had managed India for centuries. A new kind of India she envisioned being created that would be then qualified to unite with England as Aryan-rooted race empires that would co-govern the world together. Yeah, that's Annie Besant's Light and Life, lady. Okay, good. And there's a picture of her and Gandhi. By the way, Gandhi, I got mixed feelings. He definitely did things that were disruptive, but at the same measure too, he's got problems. There's a reason why the Tavistock Clinic, the headquarters of Tavistock in the town of Tavistock, that's owned by Lord Bertrand Russell and the Russell family, features right in the center of Tavistock Square a statue of Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi. He himself was openly initiated into the theosophical doctrines. It was through theosophical clubs while he was a student in London that he was taught how to develop an identity that he of what it means to be Indian. So the Theosophists taught him how to study the Upanishads, the Vedas, and he talks about that. So that's troubling. That's troubling. There's also weird things that he was doing with young girls underage, where he was trying to test out his willpower to see if he had the spiritual power to avoid temptation by having young girls sleep with him at night, of which he wrote in his journal that he frequently failed the test, whatever that means. Whatever that means. Read into it as you see fit. That being said, I'm not saying that he's all one. He's not one simplistic character in my mind. He's a complex character. He did have an abiding respect for Besant. That's unfortunate. And he did have an idea of the Varnas doctrine, which was sort of a modified caste system that should rule the world. So, and he maintained that for most of his life. The idea that there should be rules that enforce that whatever your great-grandpa did, your grandpa did, your father did, should be the only job and employment that would be available for the son, for the son's son, for the son's son's son. And that in this philosophy, we should all, whether the prince or the janitor or the sewage cleaner or the servant, everybody should be able to find God and joy in God in their different domain. Be basically happy in your station in this very hierarchical, caste-like division of society. So that's a problematic feature as well of his philosophy. He was killed for a reason, though, and I think he was killed because he was promoting, especially towards the end, a certain type of economic independence by making salt and leading movements to gain control and ignore British free trade protocols by taking the right to make their own salt in India for the Indians. That was something that did not please the upper echelon. So I'm not trying to paint him as one thing. Let me just edit there. So that's the end of this portion of today's part 2. There is a part 3, possibly a part 4, but I think I could probably end it all on a part 3. I will say one other thing is that the actual India Congress Party, I was surprised to find out in the course of doing my work on the Rosicrucian Golem, was itself actually founded by the Theosophical Society. One of the adepts of Blavatsky was this fellow by the name of Alan Octavian Hume. And Alan Octavian Hume was a high-level figure within the British Empire, and who was the founder. He gathered the first council, the first gathering of representatives of India in 1884 to found what became the India Congress Party. So, surprise, surprise, it's actually the very origin. It wasn't just that it was being infiltrated by the Theosophists, by Besant, by the Fabians, but at the very heart of it was set up as a controlled, what's known as what Hume had called a pressure valve, to take the very real revolutionary fervor that was being organized by the harmony of Sikhs, of Hindus, of Muslims, who together were all collectively conspiring at different times to rise up against their British oppressors, much in the same way that the Americans had done in 1776. So too were there major uprisings against the British Empire, and that required a pressure valve to capture, to acknowledge the injustice, but then in such a controlled way that all of the different factions could be then contained, and their anger could be then controlled, and the pressure could be then released in a controlled way, whereby instead of calling for true independence, instead the messaging became twisted towards home rule, kind of like what was being done by the Theosophists in Ireland in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and as well as many of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn figures like Roger Casement or W.B. Yeats or Aleister Crowley, all members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and also major anti-British voices against the British Empire promoting Irish independence. But what kind of independence were they promoting? And that's a good paradox for people who have come to idolize the heroic nature of some of these figures. But it's a trap. It's a trap. So I'm just going to now skim through the comment section just to see if there's anything that catches my eye. Here we go. I'm not gonna fully read what I'm pulling up on the screen here, but I'm just gonna pull a few things up. The discussion so there's James, who says the discussion of alternative common science of magnetic levitation manipulation is perpetual locomotion. These exist now. There's a lot to what you're saying right there. There is definitely suppressed science that is being developed, that has been contained within a secret science program going back many centuries. That was what Isaac Newton was a part of as a synthetic construct. This is, if you want to understand, I think the insights of how this game of controlling science and creating a false scientific construct for the masses around is actually a form of magic. It's literally a form of black magic. It's a deceit of the mind. Read Francis Bacon's New Atlantis or read his New Organum, but especially the New Atlantis or the John Dee translation of Euclid, which John Dee was translating and disseminating into the courts of England into English as a black magician who was doing scrying with Edward Kelly. So a lot of this went on to directly inspire Aleister Crowley, who saw himself as the reincarnation of Edward Kelly, the guy who channeled demons for John Dee. So what they're doing with whether it's Euclid or whether it's the new Euclidean system of Newton is they try to, the magician class would say that if we can't stop science, let's try to co-opt it and use it and obscure it for the majority such that only the initiated inner elite who have sold their soul will be granted permission to understand kind of what it is, or at least to wield its power. Maybe not to improve upon it, because I don't think they actually have the creative or the honest powers inside of their hearts to really improve honestly on science, but they do know enough to see it, to steal it, to mimic it, to wrap it in formulae, to say it is something that can be allowed to be described in symbolic, logical language, which is purely rooted in, basically Bacon. What is he innovating? He's innovating a method called the a posteriori method. That's the Baconian method. It's where you start with sensory data and then you look for patterns that you can extrapolate into laws. Inversely, the Euclidean method that is co-developed and promoted by these same circles at the same time says you start with basic unexaminable rules, a limited array of what's known as axioms, and then from those limited rules that you program into the mind, you then use those to filter out the sensory data and interpret the sensory data of whatever it is that we're looking at in whatever of the five senses, if we're experimenting in chemistry or in sounds, audio science or whatever, physics. You're interpreting your data according to rules, but you cannot really understand why those rules are true. You just must abide by them to follow and play the right game. It's called standard model thinking. So whether it's the bottom-up approach of the a posteriori of the Bacon method, or if it's the a priori method of the Euclidean modality, they work together to get the exact same kind of pattern recognition, computer thinking based on unexaminable core assumptions that you cannot think about. You cannot break free of the shackle. It becomes an invisible cage of logic that the so-called scientist gets trapped into as they become more and more myopic, more and more specialized, and they can't actually see what allowed for science to grow qualitatively, what allows for new discoveries to happen. So the fact that Bacon is innovating this while at the same time he's doing practical magic, that his followers are setting up the invisible college that becomes known as the British Royal Society, out of which synthetic cutouts like Newton become created to become the cause of discoveries that are actually being stolen by real scientists who are discovering. People like Leibniz are discovering the infinitesimal calculus. Kepler's discovering the laws of planetary motion, of harmonics, of optics, like Christian Huygens is working on making breakthroughs in the science of light. And all of these things, Fermat is doing similar work too on nonlinear geometries. And all of these things then are being extracted, the discoveries are being extracted, being turned into a descriptive formula, and then being all attributed to a guy who was apples fall on his head and who writes books like the Principia Mathematica, which he says, if you want to be able to do what I do and be a responsible scientist, maybe fruit should fall on your head, but what you should do is not hypothesize. One of the rules of logic that Newton promotes in his Principia is hypothesis non fingo, that the true scientist should not make hypotheses. The true scientist should simply absorb data from the senses and extrapolate and make formulae. That is, if you do that, you will never make a discovery. And the handlers of Newton, the Samuel Clarks, the Francis Boyles, who are actually magicians, practicing so, the Christopher Wrens, managing the invisible college, they know they're the ones managing the entire thing. They're the ones writing the textbooks. They're the ones doing the debates that Newton is not able to do on his own. He's never able to do a public debate defending the ideas that he's attributed for having discovered. It's always other people. read the Samuel Clarke versus Leibniz correspondence to get a taste of that. Same thing for Darwin. There's enough evidence that I've seen that has portrayed to me that Darwin might have some mechanistic usefulness in some of his theories of natural selection, but it's designed to deflect attention away from the higher principles organizing the creative flow of life, of purpose, of harmony, that all true scientists are actually looking at when they're examining what causes the organization of living matter, right? The improvement of states that are of a lower order to a states of higher order potential leading up to human beings is a pinnacle of this development in the tapestry and the unfolding of God's creation. That's what real scientists are doing and asking. Darwin is deflecting that complete the question becomes irrelevant in the Darwinian system. And he can't defend his own ideas in public. It always requires a Thomas Huxley. Right? And I would say it's largely the same thing for a lot of these cardouts, whether it's Elon Musk as well, who has like 19 patents to his name, but yet can't actually defend the ideas contained within the engineering insights that he's attributed for having discovered. So who's discovering them? Who's controlling these cutouts? That's always the question. Here, let's go to another one here. Oh, as far as perpetual motion devices are concerned, I don't think that is ontologically sound or philosophically sound. 0-point energy, which as an emanation out of the Tesla's defense of Isaac Newton and the Newtonian system and cosmology that presumes the existence of self-evident empty space, which we'll get at maybe next week. Actually, I think next week we'll do that. We'll go deep into what Tesla is doing with his defense of Newton in his attempt to try to retrieve and revive the Newtonian cosmology, which was being debunked by everyone who was actually making discoveries. From the Newtonian cosmology, the derivative of 0-point energy is a construct intellectually speaking, but it has no scientific validity, unfortunately. There are real sciences that are beautiful, that are dealing with harmonics, plasmas, ethers, a healthy idea of ether, which even Einstein himself defended and believed in. That's completely stripped away in the popularizing dramas that have been created for us long after Tesla died about the ignorant Einstein, who couldn't accept the higher truths of the brilliant Tesla, who lived in 5-star hotels, somehow in poverty always, but always in 5-star New York hotels, like the Waldorf Astoria, whatever. Okay, sure. So here we go. We got MZ Mouser says, I love Matt exposing cultural references to all this evil. Thank you, MZ Mouser. All right. Eleanor says, hi there. Matt does an excellent job. Thank you. I'm not just selecting these because they're complimenting me. I'm selecting them because also she's encouraging people. Eleanor's saying, go back and watch the previous one, smiley face. Yes, please do. That's pretty useful. I do have a bit of a flow in how I'm selecting the topics, just so people know. I'm trying to think, if I was running a healthy curriculum, that we all deserve to have in a university setting, then what kind of topics would I set that each one ties into the previous one and grows and builds on it? So you don't have to, but it helps. It does help. Cool One says, not surprising, one is reminded of the Khazarian Mafia. Actually, you might enjoy, there's a twist there that might surprise you, and you'll get this. Oh, here. So I recently got a shipment of books in. Our newest book that Cynthia and I wrote, along with our colleague Mike King, not the Mike King that many people are thinking of, a younger gentleman who's brilliant. It's called Black Sun Rising. It complements our new documentary, Black Sun Rising, same name. Features a picture of crazy-looking Hitler here looking up to the Black Sun, the occult Black Sun, and Blavatsky, along with a little UFO, as a little homage to the theosophical origins of the UFO cults. And it's a 200-page, pretty thick book. There's a paperback and a collector's color hardcover version. But there's a selection at the very end, a chapter, which I'll show you if I can find it quickly, called... Here it is. The Mystery of Khazaria Revealed. And so that story introduces a new angle to the Khazarian mythos that may surprise you. I'll leave it at that. But so yeah, that's available, and we've got a whole box full of these things. So if people do want a signed copy by Cynthia and myself, you can just write to us through our CanadianPatriot.org websites or the RisingTideFoundation.net website that we both maintain. There's little contact us sections that people can find, and you'll be introduced to the little email section that says write Matt or Cynthia a message, and you could say, hey, I'd like to buy a copy, and I'll tell you more about how that works. Cool Want followed that up by saying Darwin was so lame. That is an understatement, Cool Want. That is an understatement, and that might even be a topic of a future show. I might just do a proper breakdown, I think, of Darwin, the X Club that managed Darwin, the Malthusian origins of Darwin's ideas, because Darwin actually was a student of Thomas Malthus's writings, which he even said in his own autobiography gave him the idea of his theory of natural selection. And what are healthier, more moral, competent ideas of evolution that are that embrace an idea of intelligent design, of the creator, of purposefulness, that were blossoming in the 19th century? Who were the people, who were the great scientists that were developing these pretty impressive theories that were all iced out by the Darwinian model? Eleanor says, I still have a few free subs to Matt's Substack where you can see his documentary if anybody is interested. Okay, there you go. All right, cool. Thank you, Eleanor. So contact Eleanor if anybody wants to watch the Black Sun Rising documentary. Otherwise, The Hidden Hand Behind UFOs, including the H.G. Wells special, episode 2, those are all free on our YouTube channel, Canadian Patriot Press on YouTube, if you'd like to watch the hidden hand behind behind UFOs. Grease Monkey says, explain it to us like we were 5 years old. We need it that way. No, I can't do that. Okay. All right. So I think I've just scanned through the comment section. If I've missed anybody who wrote a comment that I might have missed that was important, just send me a message through the website that I mentioned, and I will do my best to address it in due course. As I mentioned again, the book Revenge of the Mystery Cults Volume 2 is available on Amazon. We've also got signed copies that people can pick up of the whole trilogy, but specifically this one if you're into the Tesla story, as well as the Elon story. Yes, that's that. I'm just going to scan through one more time. Okay, I think, yeah, I got it all. All right, so thank you, everybody. We're reaching the top of the hour and a half mark here, so I will round it out, and then next week we'll draw back in with either a presentation on the Newtonian subterfuge that Tesla was defending in his opposition to Einstein, Edison, Roentgen, Marconi, all of the actual people who were actually making technological and scientific breakthroughs, and who Tesla was saying while he was alive that he was the one, not they, but he was the one to make the discoveries that they were being attributed for having discovered. We're going to look at that. We're going to examine that. We're going to look at, like, what is the evil version of the ether that Bulwer-Lytton, the Vril followers, as well as Tesla, were promoting and promulgating, and what is the healthy notion of a divine ether that the good scientists Max Planck, Albert Einstein, and so many others were promulgating in opposition to this. How does it all derive from Francis Bacon's ritual? And yeah, we might look at the figure of the mentor that I only referenced very briefly. That's what we'll probably do. We'll look at the figure of William Crookes, Tesla's mentor, the man who is the president of the Royal Society, a Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, initiate alongside Aleister Crowley, as well as the president of the British, the Society for Psychical Research, sort of the first proto-Ghostbusters. Dan Aykroyd, for those who don't know, was also a member of the British Society for Psychical Research, as he formulated the concept for the Ghostbusters based entirely on what these guys were actually doing in the 19th century and early 20th century. So we'll look at that. I think will be the fun angle to continue our exploration into the ugly truth of Nikola Tesla and other boogeymen. So thank you, everybody, and till next week.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.